Welcome everyone to episode 26 of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts, and today I talked with Callan Alexander, who's a producer, mixer, songwriter, and singer, who also goes under the name of CLN. In this episode, we talk about why he believes the original idea is the most important part of a song, why he likes to focus on sound design for his synths and drums when he's producing music, as well as an opportunity that he was given to compose a half-hour-long piece alongside Dr. Katie Noonan for the Queensland Ballet Bespoke program. And if you could do us a favor and hit follow or subscribe on the podcast platform that you're listening or watching this on, that way you can stay up to date with every new episode. Thanks for tuning in, and this is episode 26 of What's That Sound podcast. You're listening to What's That Sound with your host, Stu Watts. What's going on? Welcome to another episode of What's That Sound. My name's Stu Watts, and today I'm here with Callan Alexander, also known as CLN. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
No worries, no worries. Let's kick it off with a little bit of an about you, and we will find out a little bit more about, how you got going, how you started, what your musical interests were when you first got into music, all of that sort of fun stuff.
Sounds good. So I've been making music for probably 10 years now. It's been a while. I sort of, my music, people first started listening to it as I'm like back at Soundcloud days is when my music started actually getting some streams. And then there was that sort of Soundcloud scene where everyone was sort of blowing up a little bit. That was while I was also studying at uni, did a bit of touring, did well for a bit. Now I do music, and also I work as an acoustics research scientist, specifically ecoacoustics. So it's like environmental acoustic sound, particularly bird sound is where my expertise lies.
That's crazy.
So I'm a bit of a mixed bag. I have the music stuff, I have the acoustic stuff. I do a bit of engineering and mix engineering and songwriting and all that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, fantastic, man. That's crazy. You're definitely on your own unique path, and I've noticed from the things that you've been able to do in your music career as well, which we'll get to. But let's take it back even earlier. Where did music come into play for you?
Always did piano lessons growing up, always did singing. My parents weren't particularly musical. My mom played a bit of piano, but always playing music in the house. Like Dad loved his Pink Floyd, Phil Collins, REM, so there's always music on in the car, in the house. I was a bit of a choir boy, not going to lie, in primary school. So I was in choirs. I always loved singing and music, but I hated practicing. I couldn't stand. So when I figured out that you could just do your own thing instead of following someone else's sheet music or something, then I was like, oh, okay, this is it.
Yeah, sick. And so what sort of music did you grow up listening to yourself?
Let's see. So the first CDs that I ever bought myself were probably it's probably emo music, to be honest.
Cool.
I liked My Chemical Romance and Paramore and that sort of thing. And also, I loved Gorilla. Demon Days was one of the earliest CDs that I bought my own, and that's where I was just like, okay, this sounds totally different to anything else I've heard before. That album still holds up, I think. Demon Days, absolutely, incredible electronic work.
The production's crazy, hey?
Yeah, and then early high school, I really liked house music. The Ministry of Sound CDs were so cool when I was in early high school, 2009, 2010, 2008. So I liked house music, and then that sort of progressed to just getting out of high school was when like Flume blew up, and like Subtract, and so that was when my music, when I started making music, I was trying to like I know everyone was sort of, it was around that Flume time and like all that. Yeah, it was a cool time.
Yeah, man. And I feel like sonically there was like a lot of, electronic music that was like pushing boundaries and trying to find a new sort of sound. Cause like you were talking about house music and stuff, I feel like EDM and house music was huge for a really long period, 5 to 10 years. It was kind of, huge. And it was pretty much the same sort of 4 to the floor type stuff with, sidechain compressors going hard and all of that sort of stuff. But then, when Flume and stuff blew up, it was completely different. It was, down tempo. It was like really heavy synth sort of sounds that, that sort of stuff was really, really cool when it first came out. So were you noticing, the production side of things when you first started getting into that electronic music, or was it kind of more just like, oh, this sounds cool?
Yeah, I always was. Before I knew what a DAW was, I was always like, how are they doing this? Especially like with guitar music, you're like, okay, yeah, they go to a recording studio and they record. And I was like, okay, I sort of understand that. But then when, it was probably when I was in like grade 10, 11. And it was actually when that sort of electronic music was getting real commercial, because it was like a bit of an underground house movement. And then, commercial music picked up on it. And then for a while, every radio song was like, and there was some, I'm not going to lie, there's some bangers in there. Like when Avicii was like, like there's some good stuff, but yes, they did that sound to death. And I think it was probably like Porter Robinson or Maddie or something. And I watched some of their videos and I was like, how did they actually make this music? And the first thing I did was I got Audacity, and I was like, okay, this is not right. And then eventually, because the internet wasn't as big a thing, like even 2010, 2011, there weren't that many resources. Like I didn't have unrestricted internet access back then. But eventually I got my copy of FL Studio and off we go. Yeah,
absolutely. And so how did you go about learning it then? Did you study at a TAFE or a uni or anything like that? Or was it all self-learnt?
No, all of my, I don't have any formal music qualifications. The acoustics is like, I wouldn't really say it's sound, but it's not that related to actual music production. Like my undergrad degree, I have a law degree and a science degree. Wow. So yeah, all the actual musical stuff is just purely self-taught, forums. Back then it was it's called Gearspace. Now I won't say the original name for your monetization purposes. But yeah, it was just forums and internet, and like back then, even finding sample was in 2010, 11 was really hard. Like even just finding a decent kick drum sample was difficult. I remember I was using like the Vengeance Essential House packs back then. I was like, yeah, this is great.
I still use them.
Yeah, me too. They're
crazy.
Top notch. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Yep, I love it. And so that's awesome, man. And so when did you start to feel like you kind of had a handle on the production side of things? What allowed you to get to that point where you're like, okay, now I get it?
I don't know if I ever felt like that, or even now. Like I always feel like there's boundaries that you can push, and you can always keep getting, like you can never know what you're doing completely in production or engineering, but it was about 2013 when I started, because I think I started dropping, like actually putting music on the internet in about 2011, 2012. But then I didn't really know how to mix or master properly. So sonically, my earliest works were very sketchy. And then I started doing, around 2013, I started doing a lot more reading around mixing and mastering, because I didn't have any money, right? Like I was too poor to pay someone to mix and master my songs. Yep. So I was like, I'm just going to figure out how to do this myself. And then 2013 was when my songs actually started like getting plays on the internet. I was like, okay, I feel like a little bit more like I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, for sure. Did you have any like mates or people that you know, got taught by or learnt alongside or anything like that? Or was it just all in yourself and just like lock yourself in a room type deal?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like the SoundCloud days, there was like a really strong community from like 2013 to 2015, 16. Particularly in Brisbane up here, we had a really, really strong scene. There were a few nightclubs that were like really cool and trendy and were just pumping with people every weekend that we could sort of go and like test out our songs. There was like the TBC Club and Alhambra Lounge were like the two big ones at the time.
Yep.
TBC came out, I don't know, it was around then. But my probably my biggest musical friend and still is Henry Feki. Feki is how you spell his music name. So we back then were making music and talking music, and there was also like coming up in Brisbane at that time, there was like UV Boy and Young Franco. UV Boy now is Skin on Skin. He's blown up huge in the last he's in that like whole Fred again world. So the communities were real tight knit around that time. We had a bunch of people that were all making music.
Yeah, there was something about that like online forum sort of type thing where if you heard about people, you know, for me, it was like the punk rock scene. If you heard about people, you just knew them. You just kind of would always, you know, go to shows, in your example, nightclubs, and you would just kind of meet everyone that was doing stuff, and it was cool to talk shop and talk music. And, you know, there wasn't, for me, many producers doing stuff that took it seriously. It was kind of just like, you know, you had to maybe hire a studio and travel to another state potentially to find the right people to do that sort of thing. But you did know the musicians that were making music for sure.
For sure. And I that community aspect still exists in Brisbane now, but I think I'm a bit older. Like I'm not as heavily involved in the community, but I think it's still there.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about your music specifically. Now it's really cool, man. I love it. It's like, you know, your synths are really like electronic sounding and modern and, you know, synthy. I don't know what other way to explain it, but it's like, you know, and your drums are really like they're crisp. They're not kind of, you know, washed in reverb. There's a lot of kind of drier drum sounds. You know, the vocal sounds are more reverb soaked and things like that. I love the down tempo sort of side of things, but I wanted to know about your process and, you know, your songwriting process. Do you start the same way every single time, or is it kind of just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks?
Yeah, I don't have a fixed formula. I'll usually approach it either a chord progression first or drums first, but depending on my mood. But usually when I start drums first, I'll end up scrapping the drums completely later. So but I'm big on, I like to do a lot of the synth sound design myself. I do use presets sometimes, but typically stay away from presets. I'd say probably 80% of my synth sounds I've sort of make myself, and that's not like an elitist thing. That's literally just because I find it fun. There's no other reason than besides I like playing with knobs, virtual knobs. But yeah, finding the right chords is a big one for me, and I usually, if I don't find the right chords, the project will get scrapped fairly quickly. Yeah. So
is there kind of a way that you know what sort of chord progressions you're going to look for, or is it just, you know, do you listen to reference tracks and things like that, or is it just purely play around and then see what works?
I try to avoid reference tracks too much when I'm actually writing, because then I'll end up like just straight copying accidentally, which I try to avoid.
100%.
Not that like chord progression copying is probably fine, to be honest, but I will more like try and build up sort of a reference like mindset by like just listening to a bunch of different cool stuff throughout my week. But then I'll try not to listen to music too close to actually making something. And chord progressions, I just mess around. My actual music theory knowledge is not that great. It's okay. Like I did piano for a long time. But yeah, I just muck around until I find something that I like the sound of, basically. Not very scientific.
And your drum sounds, I really I mean, I'm a drummer at heart, so I can always appreciate drum choices, but that's what I want to know about. You know, when it comes to your drums, sometimes they're super like trappy drum sounds. Sometimes they're more like electronic EDM sort of a drum sounds. How do you land on your sample choices and things like that? Is there specific banks that you already like love and will go to, or is it always something new?
My sample library is honestly a disaster. I have hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes of samples, and it's sort of, I also, again, try not to like obviously I have packs that I love, but I try and stay away from using the same pack over and over again if I can. So it's almost like a lucky dip. I'm like, okay, I haven't looked at this folder for years. I'm going to go in and try and make a song with that folder today. But yeah, I don't know. Lately, I'm really enjoying like bus processing on my drums a lot more, which I'm finding really fun. Which I didn't do a lot of in the early days. I was sort of processed on the individual sample, but lately I'm sort of trying to make my actual drum bus a little bit more cohesive than it probably used to be, which I'm enjoying. But yeah, I don't really have any genre. Like I just mess around with whatever I feel like at the time.
See what works and just go with it. If it feels right, it feels right type thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sick. And you know, you've got a whole lot of releases out there, which is awesome to see. And you've obviously been, you know, collaborating with a number of different artists along the way. Explain to us your, you know, collaboration process. How does that come about? Is it people that you've known for a long time, or do you reach out to people randomly?
Also depends. I'm a real like, and it's a bad habit. I'm a real like work by myself, hone in, zone out. I'm not inherently good at fostering a collaborative environment, so I have to really step out of my shell to do that. And a lot of the time, it's just finding people whose work I admire and then reaching out and trying to make something happen. But yeah, I'm inherently bad at collaborating, but trying really hard, especially. The last couple of years, I haven't had heaps of time for collaboration and music in general. But the next 2 years, I'm setting aside at least like 2 days a week for just music. And I'm going to try to be a lot more collaborative is the plan anyway.
Yeah, cool. And so how do you know when something's working and when it's not and when you need to move on?
I think it's just your ears, right? Like if it sounds good, it sounds good. If it doesn't sound good, sometimes you just gotta. And it might not even be that person is the wrong. It might just be that particular song. Like sometimes you can only. The inherent idea is always, I think, the most important thing. Like the actual idea of the song and the foundation. And there's like a point of diminishing returns where you can keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, but. You can only polish a turd so much. Like, like if the original idea is bad, it doesn't matter how exceptional an engineer or a producer you are. You're never going to make a great song out of an average idea. So it is hard, but sometimes you just have to say, all right, we're just going to sort of pull the plug on that one and try something else.
Yeah, for sure. And so, what is a good session? What is a good song production? What are those good times? When it's working, what are the things that work for you?
Difficult question. I think for me, it's a good session is when you get a good vocal at the end. Like the production especially in a collaborative session where you have a vocalist or something with you. The production doesn't matter that much. You can even just have like a bare bones chords and just some basic drums. But the vocal is what you really need like at least a vocal idea. So if I come out of a session with a good vocal idea, I know I can go and spend hours messing with the production or the mix later. But yeah, you want that vocal idea to be solid, I think.
Yeah. And what is it about the vocal, that makes it so important? Like, is it melody? Is it songwriting, lyrics? What about it?
Good question. I'm actually trying to explore this a bit because I'm starting to do a lot more songwriting myself through my publishers. It's something that I'd sort of try to avoid in the past because I didn't think I was particularly good at it, but I'm actively trying to get better at songwriting. So it's a good question. I think a lot of it, I think a lot of it is the melody, and just the catchiness. But I don't know if catchiness is something that you can necessarily quantify. But like the hookiness of a vocal, it also depends on the genre, right? Like some genres don't even need a vocal. Like if it's purely electronic, this is very when I'm talking about vocals, are sort of in a specific little niche. But yeah, I think sometimes there's just a magic about vocals that you can't necessarily capture or reproduce every time. But I think the melody has a lot to do with it, and like the cadence as well. Melody and cadence is probably for me more important than the lyrics. But again, if you have a great melody and your lyrics are terrible, it's still going to be So you sort of have to nail, and that's why I think songwriting is really hard. Is you have to nail all of those things to some extent.
100%. And I agree with you where the vocals are, you know, without a doubt for me the most important thing for a song, because alongside the drums, you know, you got to have a really strong drum part / drummer, if it's organic music. But you know, the vocals is where people kind of look for the hook without even knowing. It's like, you know, if you're humming along to something, it's most likely going to be a vocal, if not a really strong riff that's in a song. But usually people are going to be remembering the vocal. And so if you've got something that is just wishy-washy or not anchored to a really strong melodic phrase or motif or something like that, then you're going to lose the listener more likely than not. And so, yeah, to me, vocals huge, and taking the time to actually, you know, produce a vocalist. And if you're working remotely with someone and they send you something and it's just not where it needs to be, being able to give that feedback and be like, you know, it's just not there yet. No, maybe think about this, and this. But yeah, vocals huge. Is there any other kind of parts in a song that you've noticed where you kind of trip up, or, you know, you've noticed when other people give you tracks or anything like that, that you regularly find, oh, this needs a lot of work?
It's not a particular part of the track, but I find people's mixes are often a bit sketchy if they did DIY done. And yeah, probably I think the mix is actually often, it's understated how important a mix is, because again, you can have a really good song, and if the mix is bad, it's going to really detract from the impact that song has. But I think the vocal is definitely the key one, especially with the trend at the moment of like how, well, especially in commercial music, how slammed the vocal is, and the vocal and a lot of, especially more commercial songs, is like right up in your face. So it's got to be. I mean, I don't usually try to slam my vocals quite so hard, but yeah, I think the vocal is for sure the big one. And like if you're listening in a car or something, you can only hear the vocal half the time anyway, or like a cheap pair of earbuds. Or
and the amount of different uses of vocals that people are going for these days as well is crazy. You get so many tracks full of vocals that aren't necessarily the lead vocal. They might even be turned into a synth or something like that. And, you know, someone like Churches comes to mind, where they're always using vocals as synths or as instruments. And, I love it. But it's like, it's the ability to make a vocal sit well in a song and just drive the song forward. So that's awesome. When it comes to mixing, what are you looking for, you know, in your own tracks? What's important to you in the mixing process?
Yeah, actually, funnily enough, how the vocal sits is probably my biggest headache when I'm mixing most of the time. It's finding that sweet spot between the vocal being sitting out of the mix, but not sitting out too much. That's always like the hardest part, I reckon, is getting your vocal to sit just right in amongst all the other elements. But also, drums in the mix is so important, and also hard to nail sometimes. But drum and bass like the way they work together. Like 200 hertz is always my biggest headache. That section of mud at around 200. I think I spend more time around 200 hertz than at any other frequency. And I always you always second guess yourself, like, oh, I don't. Yeah, it's tricky.
The thing is, I think your music is so sparse with its arrangement. Like, it must be, difficult to find the spots where everything needs to sit. For a synth that's really like across, there's a lot of frequency range in most of the synths that I noticed in your tracks. But yeah, like you're saying, the drums and the bass, for them to find their own pocket when they are so sparse and, potentially the bass is more supporting the drums. Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
Yeah, a lot of the time. And again, I've made quite a few different genres and things over the years, and then like working for others as well. But yeah, in general, that's where my headache lies. Is the bass, drums, vocal. The synths, usually you can sort of just like find their little pocket quite nicely sometimes, except when you got like competing frequency synths. Then sometimes it can be a bit of a little bit more of a hassle, but I find bass, drums, vocals my main headaches.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much for listening so far. There is plenty more to come, so don't go anywhere. I just wanted to let you know that this podcast is made completely independently by myself with no sponsors. So if you like what you hear and you would like to show your support, you can send a donation to the PayPal link, paypal.me/whatsthatsound. The link is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for your support, and let's get back to it. And so I've also noticed that you've done some mixing for other people in the past as well. What do you have a specific process that is your process? Do you have templates set up? Like, talk to us about your mixing process.
Yeah, I do have my templates are very minimal. So I just have like I have a vocal chain, I have a master or mix bus setup that I usually gravitate towards too. Like my mix bus doesn't change much between projects, and my vocal chain changes a bit more, but also I usually gravitate towards the same plugin. So I have those set up on a template, but that's about it. Everything else I tend to do and I have like my delay buses set up and a reverb bus that I will usually, with a couple plugins that I can sort of jump between. But I don't do a ton of mixing and mastering work for others. I'm trying to get into it a little bit more, but it's definitely not my main. My main thing's production for sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But I'd love to do more of it. I just haven't tried to venture too hard in that world yet because I just haven't had that much time, to be honest.
That's sweet. Yeah. So let's talk about your other, side things that you've done in your time in music and, your other stuff. How did you kind of start to explore that, the acoustic stuff? You've done stuff that isn't specifically your music as well. Talk us through some of those things.
Yeah. So the acoustic stuff, I love nature. I love the outdoors. I love wildlife. And I love science, actually. Like I've always been like, I kind of want to be a scientist. So a lot of my day-to-day at the moment, I'm a research scientist at the Queensland University of Technology, up here in Brisbane. And also I work for BirdLife Australia. And that's sort of a two-part role. So I do field work where I go out and do bird surveys and deploy these little sound recorders. So we have these tiny little sound recorders that record for a period every single day. And then the research part of my job is analyzing that long duration sound. And part of that is figuring out what birds are in that sound. It's figuring out how much environmental noise versus man-made noise is in that sound. So again, this is very
I love
niche,
it.
but
it's crazy.
But basically, I'm a sound researcher, so that's what I do for work, like 3 days a week. I'm also doing a PhD as a sound researcher, like environmental sound, and then the music stuff on top of that is like my side. I'm trying to split that more 50-50 with music and sound research. But in terms of projects for other people, I'm signed to 120 Publishing, which is part of the Tomorrow Group. So at the moment I'm working on lots of songs for international artists, and that's sort of like they send you a pitch, you write the song, you send it back, and fingers crossed they like it, basically. Trying to do a lot more of that sort of international work. In terms of stuff I've done in the past, my favorite stuff is composing, artistic projects. So I've done one for Queensland Ballet, which I really love doing. I'd love to do more stuff like that. But
and so what did that entail?
So basically, it was an electronic music project. So I pretty much got free artistic reign with a good friend of mine, Katie Noonan, who lives up on the Sunshine Coast, and we pretty much composed a 30-minute electronic piece. She did vocals, and then they had the Queensland Ballet. They danced. They like composed. Choreographed a dance to this 30-minute electronic epic, which was so much fun to do.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was so sick. I would love to.
So they gave you the complete creative control, but then, once you feel like you had a draft or whatever, did they give you then feedback on how to improve it? What did that look like?
Yeah, for sure. Especially because in music, we often just work in like a 4/4 time signature, right? Like pretty much, it's very rare that people will venture out of 4/4, at least in electronic music, commercial music. Whereas in ballet, they really like different time signatures. So we did the initial piece was purely 4/4, and they're like, oh, could we maybe throw some different time signatures in there? So we ended up doing a couple of different time signatures. And then they just had feedback about like areas where they wanted more energy or less energy. So it was a really cool collaborative process.
It would have been so much fun to like expand on what the possibilities are. When you're doing your own music, you generally find your own sound and things that you are drawn to and things like that. It would have been really cool to explore different, sonic approaches and chord progression and like you were saying, the time signature stuff. I love challenging myself with time signatures to write unconventional melodies that, you think it's going one way and then it just goes another way or something like that.
Yeah, totally. It's I was able to go absolutely wild with the sound design, which was just so much fun. Like you have way less boundaries than you do in if you're trying to make your music radio friendly or like Spotify friendly, which you don't have to. But yeah, for this, you're writing it for that particular audience. And it was like it was artsy, like it was meant to be very, very, a bit edgy basically. So I could go nuts. It was fun.
That sounds so cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
Nice. So let's talk about some of the, workflow type things that you found doing all these different, types of jobs. Is there any kind of things that you've found over the past few years that have really sped up your workflow?
You got to know your plugins, I think, and you got to be friends with your plugins. Like you can't rely too much on your plugin presets. I think like once you actually understand a little bit better and I know there are some plugins that are like, what does this do? Where there's just way too many. But yeah, understanding my plugins better and finding a suite of plugins that I love is probably the biggest thing that's improved my workflow, and just made making music more fun. Like I love plugins.
Yeah.
So for me, finding plugins and using plugins is like part of the reason that I love making music. Like I don't necessarily
100%.
love the music songwriting part, but I love the like geeking out on plugins and yeah, love that. That really appeals to my like nerdy brain. Yeah,
beautiful. Well, let's dive in there straight away then. I always ask my guests what their favorite bits of gear are. So we'll start with software. Now you said, are you still running FL or is that still your DAW?
I use FL for most things. sometimes if I'm mixing a big session with lots and lots of vocals, I'll use Reaper instead. I used to use Pro Tools a lot, and then I swapped to Reaper as a sort of, because Avid is just
the business model.
But for like 90% of things, I do it all in FL. I think FL gets a really bad rap, and it's actually it sounds excellent. It can do everything that everything else can do. I love it.
And it's been around for that long.
It's been around for so long.
I remember using it when it was called Fruity Loops. This is when I was like 14 or 15, and it was like version 6 or something, and it was literally, from what I could see, I mean, I didn't understand it at all, but I was pretty much only using the drum sequencer and a little bit of the synths, but I had no idea how to program synths or anything back then. It was so funny. But seeing it now, it's crazy. The thing that confuses me about FL is like the routing and the mixer and stuff. It's like I could never wrap my head around it when I've seen other people using it recently. But it
is. It's weird, but like it's the same as any DAW. It's like it's just whatever you get used to is going to be the best for you, I think.
For sure. Yeah, nice. And plugin, let's dive in there. What are some of your go-tos?
I adore Plugin Alliance plugins. So they're
nice.
probably
Me
a lot
too.
of my I use BX Townhouse and BX Digital on literally every single project. I use Fab Filter, Pro Q, Pro C on also and Pro L on pretty much every single project. I really like Oxford plugins. So like Oxford Inflator and Oxford Limiter are like, I think, cheat codes for a lot of things. What else? Oh, Sound Toys. You can't go without like the whole Sound Toys suite is just, I use Decapitator on everything. I use Echo Boy a lot. I think that's probably like my main, like if I had to get rid of all of my plugins except a few, I would keep probably Fab Filter is probably like the best, and then some Plugin Alliance ones.
So before you were talking about like knowing your plugins, what is it about these plugins that you love? What is it about them? Is it the sonics? Is it the ease of use, or is it like a combination of shit?
Combination. I think sounding good is the most important. A plugin that's not going to use up your entire CPU is also actually like even if you have a beast CPU, if you've got a 150 plugin project, you still need like things to be reasonably efficient. Like the Fab Filter plugins are so quick, they load quick, they don't use up much CPU, they're quick and easy to use. But yeah, Sonics is really, and also having plugins that can do things that other plugins can't. Like the main reason I use the Brainworks, the digital, like the digital EQ, the mid-side EQ, I forget what it's actually called. I think it's BX Digital. Is you can, the stereo imaging like that you can do in that plugin is so useful. And being able to mid-side EQ in that much detail is like. It's and so easily, It's a combination of sonics and ease of use for sure.
Yeah, for sure. The one thing about the Brainworks specific like EQs and stuff, to me they're so dense. They're so dense, and like I know it's probably just one of those things where once you understand it, you understand it. But for me, they've just been so overwhelming in terms of how they work, and I'm like, they are so unique. I think that's the thing about them, is that no other plugins do what they do. So I'm sure if I spend a little bit more time into learning how to use them, they'd probably unlock a world that I haven't found yet. But yeah.
For sure, especially like, BX Digital is one of those where you just open it up and it's like, whoa. And like the AMIC, the AMIC, the AMIC,
dude, they're crazy though.
The mastering EQs, you open them up and you're like, okay, what is this?
They're so sick.
But a lot of the time with a lot of plugins, if you actually just like, they're more like a lot of those knobs you'd never even have to touch. Like, you just find the knobs that you do need and use those.
Yeah, 100%. Do you have any hardware that you use regularly?
Honestly, I am so minimal on hardware. My favorite piece of hardware is these, the Odesza LCD X's. I could not live without them. I like them more than almost any pair of monitors that I've ever used.
Yeah.
But besides that, I MIDI controller and a Korg mini log. Like that's the main hardware that I use. I used to have tons of hardware, and it ended up just overcomplicate. It'd be less efficient in the end product. So I'm very, very much in the box for almost everything now.
I love it. So let's talk about, over the time that you've been doing this, are there certain times that you point towards that you're like, that changed stuff for me? Is there any kind of key learning moments in your, career?
Yeah. Look, I haven't had a massive career, but I've been able to do some really cool things, and like I've toured the United States. I got to play Red Rocks in Colorado, which was insane. For me, it was all just like there's such a luck element and right place, right time. But it just comes down to, you have to, for me, it's just keep putting out music, keep putting out the best music that I can, find people that I trust to help me with that music. And that's just like my manager, Jez from Mammal Sounds, has been with me he's been my manager also for like 10 years. He believes in my music and has pushed it from the start. So like I think finding people that believe in your product as much as you do has been key for me. But again, I haven't haven't done anything massive or groundbreaking. I'm just glad that people listen at all to anything that I've made, I think that's awesome. Yeah.
Well, to be able to do it for such a long period of time is, to me, what's impressive for any, music maker, producer, songwriter, anything like that, to have the longevity to stick it out, to see through things that might be challenging or difficult, but also learning from it, and having that consistency is super important to me, and that's a lot of the time is what's impressive about, people like yourself and other engineers that, don't have to be super well known in doesn't have to be a household name or anything like that, to be able to work on music as your thing is crazy. So that's awesome. For sure. Man.
And any dollar you make making music is a big win, in my opinion.
Everything is better than nothing. That's how I look at it as well.
It's awesome to be able to do what we do and get paid for it in any capacity. So I'll take it. For sure. Yeah.
Nice. And so on that, one thing that I always like to ask my guests is, what are some, you've already given a lot of advice, but what are some of the best bits of advice that you could give, first of all, to, producer engineers, and then secondly for artists?
Right. For producer engineers, I think it's focus on your craft, and then the rest will come eventually. And the most important thing is to be good at what you do as a producer and engineer, I think, and be unique in what you do. You need to know what you're doing. You need to have a good sound. You need to be confident in your sound, and just spend that time making music. That's all there is for producers and engineers. There's no cheat code to getting good. You just have to sit down and you have to make and you have to mix, and that's the only way. I don't think there's many people that can sit down and be even vaguely good at it in 6 months. You know what I mean? Like it's you got to put time in to be good at production 100%. Or mixing. And for an artist, it would be, it's very cheesy, but be yourself. Like make music that you think sounds good and make it for you. And I think that's what I've always tried to do, is make music that I like. And that may not be the most Spotify friendly music, but at the end of the day, if it's a genuine product, and you love it, then other people will probably love it too.
I love it. It's so true. You just, if you focus in on doing stuff that you love, that you enjoy, it will actually not only come easier, but it'll allow you to do it for longer because you'll just find the joy in it rather than trying to make yourself a certain thing, which is really tough to do. It's like,
For sure.
oh, I need to sound like this or I need to sound like that. It's like you don't, one, but two, it's a challenge to do that and to actually step outside of what you enjoy doing is kind of against the point, in my opinion. It's like, we make art, we do things because we love them. Even as engineers and producers and people that provide music as a service or provide a service to other people, we still inject our personalities and our artistic side into it. So it's important that we listen to our inner voice and go towards that as the main thing.
100%.
Nice one, man. Well, thank you for joining us. What do you got on the horizon? What's the future, the next 6-12 months look like for you?
I am going to be writing like crazy. I have this project, and then I also have a bit of a side project that's like semi-anonymous, but if you dig hard enough, you'll find it.
Cool.
So I'm going to release, I'm just going to release a ton of music this year, basically. Planning to put more time into music this year than I have in the last few years, which is exciting.
Unreal.
Doing a lot more songwriting through my publishers, which is also going to be great. And then, finishing off my PhD. That's
fantastic. Nice one, man. Well, that's so good. Thank you once again for joining me today. This has been sick. Where can people find you online? I'll have the links in the show notes for anyone that wants to find you. But yeah, just let us know here.
clnmusic.com, I think, is the URL, and at CLN Music on Instagram and probably all the other social media as well.
Beautiful. Well, yeah, thanks again, man. Appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's checked this out, this conversation. The best thing that you can do to help this podcast is to share it around, share it with a friend in a DM or on your stories or in a conversation. Just help spread the word to more people than already know about us, and for you to share, to follow and subscribe. That way you can stay up to date with any new episode that we release. But that's about it from us. Thank you again, Callan. And we will see you next time on What's That Sound podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to What's That Sound. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform to stay up to date with each new episode. We'll catch you next time.